Welcome to the Starzology Astrology Podcast. I am your host, Alison Price, and I'm here once again with my co-host, Arwynne O'Neill. Welcome, Arwynne.
Hi, Alison. It's great to be here again.
It's lovely to have you. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about Eris.
Yes, we are.
So perhaps you could tell us a little bit about Eris to start with, for those who don't know what it is, or maybe for people who've never even heard of it.
Absolutely. Happy to. So in 2005, Eris was discovered by the Caltech astronomers Mike Brown, Chad Trujillo, and David Rabinowitz. Shout out to our Caltech astronomers who have their eyes on the sky. The discovery was announced on July 29th, 2005. Mike Brown told the New York Times that he was reviewing telescopic photos. He spotted a moving dot, and he carefully noted the time, which was 11:20 a.m. And this is the good part for us. This is what Mike Brown said. He said he noted the time because he knew that astrologers would ask.
Don't you love an astronomer that likes astrologers?
They're few and far between, but do I ever love them?
Yeah.
Yeah, and he has gone on to actually show that he really does love astrologers in his way, because he's given interviews with astrologers. He has continuously mentioned that the science of astronomy and the science of astrology are interrelated. They're of the same root. One would not exist without the other.
Yes.
And the one that wouldn't exist is astronomy, because astrology came way before. They were one science until in the global time sense very, very recently. It was only a few hundred years ago that they even split into two different sciences. So for Mike Brown to give the shout out to the astrologers is very significant and wonderful. Interestingly, though, Pluto was found to be just a tiny bit smaller than Eris. And this was not good news for Pluto. As anyone who was around at the time will remember, this caused an absolute disruption in the solar system as we had known it since 1930, when Pluto was first discovered. Pluto had been a longtime favorite of children, mainly because it shares a name with a beloved cartoon character of the Disney variety. And Eris's discovery in a roundabout way and very quickly actually resulted in the demotion of Pluto from a full-fledged planet to a dwarf planet, which was a very new classification that they invented for planets that are just not quite making the grade size-wise. And
exactly.
Eris and Pluto are now considered dwarf planets.
Yes.
So,
along with Ceres, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And this was huge.
Huge, absolutely enormous news. And it's funny because in astrology, as in mythology, we interpret new archetypes that are introduced into the collective, and we observe events and we collect stories and we figure out how to apply them to our lives. And for all the modern planets that have discovery dates, we have origin stories.
Yes.
So Uranus, for example, was discovered in 1781, and it very much coincided with the Industrial Revolution. And so it's associated with innovation, with science.
With
electricity, absolutely. Neptune was discovered in 1848, and it is associated with the arts, with film, with the beginnings of photography, which was invented right around the same time, with illusions and delusions. There were drugs, anesthesias that were invented around this time. So all these very Neptunian kind of things erupted into the public consciousness around this time. No pun intended. Pluto was discovered in 1930, right before World War II, and sandwiched between the two world wars, which were the biggest loss of life and mass destruction of land and life that had ever been seen on our planet. And also, eventually, with the discovery of the atom, splitting of the atom. And so we have the nuclear weapons coming from the discovery of how to split the atom, which was around the same time. So Pluto is associated with destruction. What I'm saying is that all these planetary discoveries coincide with the amazing discoveries or phases of human experience that correspond to the meaning of that planet. So with Eris, we would also expect that something that corresponds with the meaning of Eris in mythology would occur, and that has 100% played itself out, starting with the demotion of Pluto, because Eris, let's switch over to the mythology now, is the goddess of discord in Greece, in ancient Greek mythology. A little bit about the mythology of Eris. She was the daughter of Zeus and Hera, and the sister of Eris, who you obviously we'll know as the god of war. Eris personified discord, strife, competition, and rivalry. And this is a bit of an interesting kind of nod to the sexism of the ancients, because Ares, her brother, was the god of war, which in Greece and Rome in ancient times was the god of war, all of the good things about war, about conflict, about being a hero. And so the male god of war gets to, have all these heroic things associated with him. The female counterpart is all the sort of the nasty, like sneaky discord and disruption and the things that the Greeks and Romans kind of were afraid of about the female, about the feminine, rather. So women were not educated to the level of men. Obviously, they couldn't go to war except in Sparta, which is a whole different story. But so women who are like violent or aggressive were not to be trusted. This is not a thing to be proud of, like to be like a heroic man. A woman who had a toughness or like a warlike spirit was not a good thing.
Yes.
So Eris, as the myth goes, was not invited to the wedding. So Eris represented everything that the ancients feared in the feminine: irrationality, out of control emotions, cunning, without thought to the consequences. Men had the warlike testosterone kind of good stuff to do with discord and war, but Eris was considered super dangerous. So she was portrayed as haunting the battlefield and delighting in human bloodshed, which of course, you don't say that about Ares, but what could be more like that than a war god? But anyway, so due to her disagreeable nature, Eris wasn't invited to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis. These are the future parents of Achilles. So this is a big wedding. She's not invited. She shows up anyway. And when she's refused entry into the wedding, she flies into a rage. And demonstrating a fiendish tactical understanding of her rivals, she gets a golden apple and inscribes it "for the fairest" and tosses it into the midst of the goddesses Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, the A-list goddesses, right? And so she's tossing this apple into their midst, and they immediately begin fighting over it. Just a full Real Housewives of Mount Olympus, right? And Zeus, who I'm picturing as like a toga-clad Hugh Hefner in this situation, goes, okay, break it up, ladies, break it up. No, we can settle this, right? And so he gets Paris of Troy, this young shepherd, to judge the contest between the women. He'll decide who's the fairest. You ladies just sit back and be beautiful, and he'll decide who's the fairest. So immediately the goddesses strip their togas off and begin offering him bribes. Right? So Hera offers him Aphrodite, who is obviously probably the front runner anyway, because she's the goddess of beauty, offers Paris the hand in marriage of Helen of Troy, who was the most beautiful woman in the world. She also happened to be the wife of King Menelaus of Sparta. So this marriage that she breaks up by just offering Helen to Paris breaks up a marriage and sparks the 10-year Trojan War. So this is why they say, like, Helen's face was the one that launched 1,000 ships. Well, those ships were the warships that went to wage war in ancient Greece. So Eris basically starts the Trojan War, which is why she is considered the goddess of discord. So Eris's discovery was the beginning of the end for Pluto. He lost his seat at the table of the gods, and this was Eris, the planet's, fault. So obviously what happens in ancient mythology is mirrored now in our own very beloved and nearby solar system. The demotion of Pluto, the god of the underworld and the favorite of Disney-loving children everywhere, is now a dwarf planet, and this is all because Eris was discovered in 2005. Interestingly, when Eris was discovered, astrologically, the entire solar system, aside from the moon and Venus, was masculine. Arguably, Mercury is a bisexual or pansexual planet, sure, but every other planet, and all the big ones, your Jupiter, your Saturn, your all of these, male. 100% named after male gods. So you've got the Ginger and Marianne, as I'm calling the moon and Venus. You've got your homemaker and your love goddess. And all of a sudden, in 2005, they discovered the bad girl of the solar system, which brings in a very interesting dynamic into what had been for at least 100 years since the discovery of Pluto, a very sort of masculine and a very sort of traditional collection of energies. So now we have kind of this rebellious, shit-disturbing kind of planet and goddess and energy with Eris. And crazy things start happening with women around this time. Very interestingly, we have the Me Too movement, we have cancel culture, we have all of this stuff that begins to happen. And also, one of the things that I find really fascinating about the history of Eris and the discovery of this planet is that Mike Brown, when he first identified her, there's a whole process that goes into the naming of any planet or moon or asteroid or anything. They usually follow mythological traditions, but they'll usually sort of have a family of, let's say, all of the moons of Jupiter will be a certain type of god that they'll name them after. This is a process, right? But when Mike Brown first discovered Eris, he actually nicknamed her Xena, as in Xena, as in the TV show from the 90s, Xena Warrior Princess, precisely. And if you don't know this television show, well, I mean, you can go find it. It's available. It's not great, but it is kind of great as well. I was a big fan back in the day. So Xena, Warrior Princess, was a former mercenary who now has decided to only fight on behalf of those who can't defend themselves. So she's basically kind of like a leather-clad Wonder Woman for the downtrodden, right? And she goes on these little adventures with her sidekick / possibly lover, Gabrielle, who they just went from village to village and helped out whoever needed their help the most, right? And interestingly, the woman who played Xena, Warrior Princess, was named Lucy Lawless. And if you look at her chart, which is readily available online, she is all up in Eris. She, first of all, has several planets in Aries, and this is where we need to also get into where Eris is in the solar system right now. So Eris is in Aries and has been for quite a while, like several decades. And this is because it has an eccentric orbit and it also has a very, very long orbit. It is outside of Pluto and it spends a really long time in Aries and then some shorter time in other signs. But it's been in Aries basically since the modern 20th century.
Since 1926.
Exactly. So since Pluto was discovered and longer. So interestingly, Lucy Lawless has several planets in Aries, many of which are conjunct. So her sun, moon, ascendant, Eris, Saturn, and the North Node are all between 5 and 18 degrees Aries. Yeah, so who better to portray what would then become Eris, Xena, the new planet, but Lucy Lawless. So I also have some other examples of charts that really exemplify what Eris has come to mean. And here's an interesting thing, too. Just to quote another astrologer who found a sort of feminine warrior archetype in this new planet, Eris. This is Nick Fiorenza. He's a sidereal astrologer. And he says that Eris is a feminine warrior archetype that has no fear or hesitation to intercede and expose a greater hidden truth. Eris will challenge a situation when based on false pretense. Eris provokes change by upsetting the status quo. And she upsets and discloses and exposes clandestine affairs and lies bare what's hidden beneath naive assumptions. So she opens our eyes to what's covered up by lies. She reveals deceit, shameful, ugly, or unacceptable behavior. And we are left to redefine and reorganize our rapidly expanding awareness after the disruption and discord that Eris creates, which, if you think about a lot of the things that have happened since 2005, specifically in women's issues, 100%. That's a really great, way of encapsulating it. So as I said, a lot of these really interesting advances for women have occurred since 2005 in the discovery of Eris. But really, one of the things that I think kicked off a lot of stuff was right around, it was actually 2004, August 13th. And then this happened in India. And I believe that we've discussed this before, but in passing, it's actually kind of such a fascinating story. I really love to bring it to light for people who don't know about this. The name of the lady who this is kind of known as her story now is Usha Narayan, and that's spelled Ushanarayane. So she, around the time of Eris's discovery, this news story occurred, and there's a poor village in India that made international headlines. There's a criminal named Akku Yadav, and his gang had been terrorizing this village for more than a decade. They committed multiple murders, raped women and young girls. He was scheduled to appear in court at 3 p.m. on August 13th, 2004, when a mob of 200 women broke into the courthouse And the Guardian newspaper wrote about this story and said Yadav, who's the leader of this gang, spotted one of the women he had raped. He called her a prostitute and threatened to repeat his crime against her. The police laughed, and she took off her sandal and began to hit him and shouted, "We can't both live on this earth together. It's you or me." And then all the other women who had come to support her, armed with vegetable knives and chili powder, closed in on him, and the officers were unable to stop them from basically stabbing him 70 times, emasculating him, obviously. And when the police tried to round up the attackers, the women yelled and chanted, "Arrest us all." So this is 200 women taking back their village after being terrorized by this gang of rapists for decades. And this is right around the time Eris is discovered. So this, I think, is an amazing story of harnessing the power of Eris.
Wow.
It's not all discord. It's not all disruption. But sometimes things need to be disrupted because the status quo is intolerable.
Yes.
The status quo allows people to be victimized with impunity. And this also brings in the stories that later came about with Harvey Weinstein and all of these other people who had been allowed for decades to victimize people women mostly, who didn't have any recourse. It was the system. Whether it was the system in this village or whether it was the Hollywood system where you just put up with it because you want to have a career in film and you just have to go to Harvey Weinstein's house and whatever, or let him in your hotel room or whatever happens, just don't talk about it or don't complain because no one cares. You're a star now. You've got an Oscar. You don't have a right to complain. Well, Eris says, yes, you effing do.
Yes, yes.
And this is what's happened since the discovery of Eris. And just to kind of recap, I mean, interestingly, I remember reading about this back when it happened in 2005. And I did a little presentation on Eris in 2018. I was almost afraid to kind of go back and find out what had happened to these women. I thought, God, I don't want to know if they all ended up in jail, But no, wonderfully, Kasturba Nagar is the name of this village. And they actually now got a school, plush apartment blocks, and good roads, thanks to the emergence of this town, this village, as a services, education, and healthcare hub in India. And all of the women who were accused of conspiracy, the charges were eventually dropped. By 2014, they were all free. Usha Narayan was one of the few college-educated women in the village. She was the one who had stood up to the gang before when they had raped her neighbor's 13-year-old daughter and tried to extort money from the family. She barricaded herself in the house and taunted the thugs from inside as they shouted threats and tried to break in. And she finally turned on the gas in her own home and said if they didn't leave, she would blow up the house and everyone in a nearby radius with it. And that's very Eris as well. I love that. Eventually they broke down. And even though she was not at the courthouse on August 13th when the 200 women attacked, she was one of the very first people who were rounded up in connection with this revenge killing. And all the other cases fell apart. But eventually, it took almost 10 years for her to finally be acquitted. She and her brother were considered kind of ringleaders or whatever. They were just disturbing the peace too much. But eventually, by 2014, they were all free and acquitted. And now the village is like this little thriving sort of center for services and healthcare.
Amazing. Yeah. Amazing expression of the energy that came through Eris.
Yeah, exactly. For just not taking the shit anymore. Just saying, no, arrest us all. We're taking this into our own hands.
Wow.
Yeah. Around the same time, in August of 2005, right around the time that Eris was discovered, and the reason, of course, that this is important is as I was just describing before, when planets are discovered, frequently the world events will just conspire to make that discovery meaningful in really wonderful, mythologically significant ways. And one of the things that was very significant that happened in August 2005 was The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo was published. And this is by the late Swedish author Stig Larsson. The original title in Swedish was The Men Who Hate Women, which is kind of an interesting thing. Obviously, girls with dragon tattoos are a bit more salesworthy in the rest of the world, and certainly went on to sell millions of copies. The lead character of those books, and there were actually 3 books that were published, with the same,
a movie, right?
And a few movies, actually.
Okay.
The name of this character was Lisbeth Salander. She is an absolute Eris archetype. She was antisocial, aggressive, daring, troubled, and a vigilante genius, probably on the autism spectrum, as described in the books. She's a victim of multiple sexual assaults and the male patriarchy, all that stuff, turned avenger, turned feminine like archetype heroine. Her revenge that she exacts on her oppressors is horrific, but totally justified. So you find yourself, as you're reading these books, like cheering her on to do these awful things, because we know that the things that have been done to her are absolutely awful. She targets not only her victimizers, but the entire system that enabled them. So at the heart of the popularity of this series is this new feminine archetype, which is arguably sort of almost a masculine archetype, but it could only have existed in the modern era. She is bisexual. She's probably autistic. She's a hacker. She's a sort of a mad genius type. She's antisocial. She doesn't have social skills. She's almost like a member of the X-Men, or like a female Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
Like she can solve mysteries like with these crazy like mathematical equations in her head. She's a child abuse survivor, a rape victim, and she very much embodies an eye for an eye justice. And she will defend other people who have been victimized and go after their attackers in like a absolute bloodthirsty kind of psychopathic way almost. And in fact, interestingly, there were many articles and sort of think pieces and scare pieces written about her, about the new kind of female anti-heroine. And Psychology Today actually wrote a big article speculating about whether she was a sociopath or a superhero. And this is very much an Eris archetype, this volatile troublemaker who makes people terribly uncomfortable at parties and would probably rather not go to parties, but would rather be on the dark web catfishing for pedophiles instead of socializing with people. And this is definitely not any kind of female archetype that we had ever seen before 2005 at all. So this is really fascinating, just the correspondence between this archetype arising and Eris as a planet and an archetype. Also, we happen to have a birth date for Lisbeth Salander, the character.
Right.
And as astrologers, we can interpret any chart that has a birth date and time. So Lisbeth Salander, the character, was born April 30th, 1978 at 6:30 p.m. And we know this from the actual text of the book. So it's AA rated for what it's worth. Right? So interestingly, well, actually, the time actually is extrapolated. The time, I'm assuming she has Scorpio rising. I think anyone would agree probably with. Anyway, so yeah, she has Eris, the planet, conjunct Mercury in Aries, exactly opposite her Pluto in the 12th house, if you agree with the 12th house, the Scorpio rising, which I've extrapolated. She's a pissed off loner type who makes enemies and gets mixed up with the criminal underworld. Spoilers ahead, by the way. Mercury Eris is conjunct, and she exposes the corrupt government, but also reveals the truth through the press. So this is Mercury, right? And the courts. So the Mercury Eris is trine Saturn. So she uses the courts in her favor. She steals millions of dollars from the same criminals that she is revealing, and does this all sneaky hacker style. And so they can't come after her for stealing all this money. And she's got Neptune in the second house, which I'm going to say that explains that. So Lisbeth Salander.
Okay.
Eris archetype. One more Eris archetype that I would like to put a spotlight on is Chelsea Manning, formerly Lieutenant Bradley Manning. She was the U.S. Army whistleblower. She leaked the collateral murder video of the U.S. military helicopter shooting the Reuters reporters and the innocent Iraqi bystanders. She leaked a massive database of war logs from Iraq and Afghanistan. And the reason she did this was so that the American people would know what was being done in their name. She is not anti-war. She actually joined the military of her own accord as a young man. And then when she was a young gay man, when she was discovered and put in jail in 2010, one of the very first things that she did was come out as trans and say, you can write about me all you want, but you have to call me Chelsea. So, I mean, amazing Eris icon just in the sense that she's disrupting the hell out of the military industrial complex. And then on top of all that, saying, not only am I a young gay man, but I'm trans and call me Chelsea and F you. It's amazing. I'm not going to lie. I think she is incredibly admirable and a wonderful testament to Eris's aptitude for disruption. Sometimes she chooses to manifest the goddess in unusual ways. Right. And Chelsea Manning is 100% one of those wonderful archetypes, I think, in the modern world. So yeah, WikiLeaks published all these war logs, and we are still dealing with the fallout. And wonderfully, her sentence, she was sentenced 35 years in prison in 2013. But one of President Barack Obama's last acts in office was to commute her sentence. She served 7 years. She attempted suicide twice, at least, that she admits to, while she was in prison under horrible conditions, because, of course, the military does not look fondly on people who blow the whistle. But she has since published a book. And she's contributed countless articles to the Guardian and other publications. And she even ran for the Senate in Maryland briefly. And we can probably look forward to continuing to hear more from Chelsea Manning in the future. Her chart is fascinating. She was born December 17th, 1987 in Crescent, Oklahoma. Time of birth unknown. She's got the moon, Mars, and Pluto conjunct in Scorpio. She's got the Sun, Mercury, Saturn, and Uranus conjunct in Sagittarius, which I picture this as like firing flaming arrows into the heart of the corrupt military, industrial, gender binary, partisan media industrial system. And her chart even looks like a crossbow. If you look at it, it makes the shape of a crossbow. She's got Eris conjunct Jupiter, and they're all square some other planets, and her chart is definitely worth looking at. So I think of her as an absolute modern Eris archetype.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
These are quite powerful people, aren't they?
100%. Yeah.
So how would we interpret then Eris in your everyday chart? Then would you?
Well, I mean, like we said, it's been in Aries since the 20s.
Yeah.
So anywhere that you have planets in Aries, anyone who is in Aries or has personal planets in Aries probably has Eris conjunct one of them.
Right.
It's somewhere in everyone's chart.
Yes.
So whatever house system you use, I personally, my Aries house is the 6th house. So where do I feel the power, the powerful feminine disruptive energy? Well, it's in my 6th house of work, which might not be the most comfortable placement for it.
Right.
Weirdly, what is your Aries house?
10.
10. Oh, fascinating.
Can join the midheaven.
There you go. Nice. Yeah. So everyone has Eris somewhere. Yeah. And if it's conjunct one of your personal planets, I mean, really, it's like one of the outer planets. It's a dwarf planet, whatever.
It has to connect, I think, properly to your chart.
For sure.
Conjunctions are really strong.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why when I was doing all of this research, I found quite a few really interesting people who do have a prominent Eris conjunction, like Lucy Lawless, for example, like Camille Paglia, who's famously called herself the Amazonian feminist. I mean, she's got all kinds of connections to Eris in her chart. The original Wonder Woman, which is hilarious because Wonder Woman now is in the movies, she's Aries' sister, which is what Eris was originally. Well, the original chart for Wonder Woman has Eris very prominent in her chart. So yeah, I mean, if you have planets in Aries, take a look, and you might actually have a conjunction to Eris, and you can harness this badass feminine archetype all your own.
It is. I think it's a very strong energy. If it's connected to the chart, it definitely is. Yeah. I always look for Eris for the Oriental planet if someone's born with the sun in Aries, Taurus, or Gemini, because if Eris is Oriental, it gives them an edge. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there's definitely that to be considered. And I know that it is frequently retrograde, and that's because it can actually retrograde 13 times across 1 degree. So it doesn't really, in a way, it blurs down that energy. So it could be direct or retrograde or whatever. But yeah.
I have a little, I don't know, it's a little, I wouldn't call it like a soliloquy, but it's kind of a little Eris prose that I closed my presentation with in 2018. And I call it Be Your Own Heroine. Better yet,
right, let's hear it.
Better yet, be someone else's. One way of looking at this cultural moment and the age of Eris is that women are being challenged to be the heroine of their own story. That's heroine with an E at the end. No one's recommending heroin the drug. That's still bad. But being your own heroine isn't easy. It's not as easy as being a princess. You can't just put on a tiara. You actually have to do something. And that's not easy. Armor is heavy and it's uncomfortable. It's not like a princess dress where you can just kind of put it on and feel comfy and go to the grocery store like a lot of kids these days. There's work involved. There's risk involved. And men have known this forever because men have always been the ones who were asked to take risks, join the army or defend their homeland or what have you. But that crown is not just for the men anymore. Like women, need to be their own heroines, need to be the heroines of others. And it means taking risks and being the change you want to see in the world, and taking responsibility, because no one's born brave. You actually have to grasp that and do something to be brave. And it's a good story too, because if you stand up for someone, you will be telling that story until your dying day if you actually do something heroic. And taking risks and putting your ideals ahead of your personal comfort, like Chelsea Manning did, for example, you may suffer consequences, but in the end, you will, if not be rewarded, be remembered. And that's what heroes want. And telling women to be strong is not about blaming the victim, because there are dangers in the world. Bad things sometimes happen to good people. And we can all have empathy for women who have been victimized and who suffer. But we can also be stronger because we know that life requires you to be strong in certain situations. And if you can be a hero for someone, what is better than that? Yeah. There's many ways to be a feminist, but this is just a new way to be a feminist.
To express it through the Eris and hopefully for young women coming up, young girls coming up.
Exactly.
And it's very different to what it was 50 years ago.
Very different.
And this is because Eris has been discovered and we're now tapping into this energy.
Yeah. So be your own hero. Yeah. Better yet, be someone else's.
There you go.
Yeah.
Great words.
And this is not to say that, obviously men have Eris in their chart as well. And they can also take the mantle of not just being a hero, but being a disruptor. Obviously disruption is one of the big buzzwords of our modern era, since slightly before the discovery of Eris even. Little boys have always been dressing up as Batman or Superman or Spider-Man. And this has been totally fine, even though you could say that, well, Batman's problematic. He's like just a rich white guy, whatever, blah, blah, blah. You can be a hero in any way. And action figures, the costumes of being a hero have typically been like a masculine thing. And now there's female heroes that you can be Wonder Woman, whatever. You can be the superheroes versus the aliens, the cowboys versus the astronauts, the vigilante, or whatever. You can appropriate any kind of heroic mantle you wish to, whether you're male or female. Mothers, grandmothers, grandfathers, brothers, sisters, everyone can be a hero. And it doesn't matter what gender or where on the gender spectrum you fall. Obviously, Chelsea Manning's a great example of that.
Yeah. You can tap into your Eris energy.
For sure.
It's very new, I think.
Yeah.
And it's very much of the time we live in now, actually. This wouldn't have gone down 30 years ago.
Hell no.
No.
No. Yeah.
Okay, great. So just for those of you who want to know a little bit more, we're going to put a link to Arwynne's research and her presentation. That will be in the description below.
Absolutely.
And I want to thank you, Arwynne, once more for coming and having such interesting insights into astrology these are hopefully conversations that our listeners can think about during the weeks. And it's not just a matter of just listening to it once and ba-bum. It's something to think about. And I think that's the important of what astrology can offer as well.
Agreed. Thanks so much for having me, Alison. This has been a great conversation.
It's been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for getting this far through the episode. I just want to take a moment to tell you about the two main options of my astrology services. So the first one is coaching. If you are an aspiring astrologer, and by that I mean someone who's perhaps a hobbyist astrologer or someone who's learning astrology or a student, or you've got a few books and you've been doing it for a while, but perhaps you need a little bit of help to bring it all together, then maybe getting some astrological coaching from me would be the answer for you. The astrology coaching I offer is a 1-hour session on Zoom, and it's tailored to answer your particular questions. For example, if you have issues with natal chart readings, we can go there. Or if you're having problems working with your forecasting, we can go there. Or even basic astrology stuff, or even getting yourself organized for your astrology business. The idea is that astrological coaching will answer your particular questions. It's tailored specifically to you and where you are in your astrological journey. And I'm happy to help you out with some guidance about how you can get going, what to focus on, and what to dismiss. So that would be the astrological coaching for people trying to learn astrology. The second astrological service I offer is consultations. So this is for someone who perhaps doesn't know anything about astrology, but they just want to have their chart read or get their chart done. Call it what you will. So once more, this is a 1-hour consultation over Zoom. I will interpret your chart, tell you about the main features, tell you about where the energy is flowing, and all the rest of what is entailed in a thorough natal chart interpretation. I can also add in some forecasting in there too, bearing in mind we only have 1 hour. So just in summary, I've got coaching for people who want to learn astrology, and I've got consultations for those who want to get an astrology reading done. I'm Alison Price from Starzology.com. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next time.